Formula One just created a problem so big, the drivers are turning against it after only 3 races. This wasn't supposed to happen. A brand new era. Years of development. Millions invested. And yet, within weeks, drivers are calling it a disaster. Because here's what changed everything. Cars are suddenly losing power, in the middle of straights, at over 300 kilometers per hour. Speed differences hitting over 40 kilometers per hour. And one crash, over 50 G, that proved every warning was real. Now the entire grid is furious. Not just one team. Not just one driver. Everyone. Even race winners are saying it doesn't feel right. Even veterans are questioning if this is still a sport. This isn't just controversy. This is a crisis. And the FIA is already being forced into emergency talks, just weeks into a new era. But here's the twist. The real problem isn't just the rules. It's what those rules are doing to Formula One itself. And if they don't fix this, this could become one of the biggest failures in the sport's history. Stay with me. At first, it didn't look like a crisis. It looked like progress. A new generation of cars. A new way of racing. A new identity for Formula One. Everything about the 2026 rules was designed to feel like a step forward. More efficient. More modern. More aligned with the future. But there was one problem. Nobody really knew how it would feel, at full speed. Because simulations can predict performance. They can model behavior. They can estimate outcomes. But they cannot recreate pressure. They cannot recreate instinct. They cannot recreate what happens when 20 drivers are pushing to the absolute limit. And that's where everything started to fall apart. Because from the very first race, drivers noticed something was different. Not just technically. Emotionally. The car didn't feel connected. The response wasn't immediate. The behavior wasn't consistent. And at first, they tried to adapt. That's what Formula One drivers do. They adjust. They learn. They find the limit. But this time, the limit kept moving. Because the system itself was changing the car in real time. Energy deployment. Battery levels. Power shifts. All happening constantly. All affecting performance, moment by moment. And that creates something Formula One has never really had before. Uncertainty. Not from the track. Not from the weather. From the car itself. And that's where frustration begins. Because drivers are no longer reacting to racing conditions. They're reacting to a system. A system that decides when they can push. When they have power. When they don't. And that changes everything. Because now, it's not just about driving fast. It's about managing. Managing energy. Managing deployment. Managing limitations. And for some drivers, that felt wrong immediately. Max Verstappen saw it first. He didn't describe it as difficult. He described it as unnatural. Overtakes that didn't make sense. Speed that appeared and disappeared. Moments where the outcome wasn't decided by skill, but by timing. And once he said it, others started to feel it too. Because this wasn't an isolated experience. It was happening to everyone. Different cars. Different teams. Same issue. And that's when the shift begins. Because when every driver feels the same thing, it stops being adaptation. It becomes resistance. But here's the detail that made it impossible to ignore. This system doesn't just affect performance. It affects trust. Drivers no longer trust what the car will do next. And in Formula One, that's everything. Because at over 300 kilometers per hour, you don't have time to think. You react. Instinctively. Automatically. But if the car behaves in a way you don't expect, that instinct disappears. And when that happens, drivers hesitate. They lift. They hold back. And that's the exact opposite of what Formula One is built on. But even then, it still wasn't a full-blown crisis. Not yet. Because Formula One doesn't break instantly. It builds pressure. Race after race. Lap after lap. Until something happens. That proves everything the drivers were already feeling. And that moment? Changed everything. And that moment finally arrived in Japan. Not as a surprise. Not as something unexpected. As confirmation. Everything the drivers had been warning about became real. A car ahead, suddenly losing speed. Not gradually. Instantly. Another car behind, arriving at full power. Full commitment. No time to react. Over 300 kilometers per hour. And in a matter of seconds, it was over. A 50G impact. One of the most violent crashes in recent years. Exactly the scenario Carlos Sainz had predicted weeks before. That's when everything changed. Because up until that moment, there was still debate. Still discussion. Still uncertainty. Was it really that bad? Was it just a difficult transition? Would it improve over time? But after that crash, There were no more questions. Only answers. And those answers were uncomfortable. Because now, this wasn't about performance. It wasn't about spectacle. It was about safety. And once safety becomes the center of the conversation, everything else disappears. Drivers stopped holding back. Max Verstappen didn't hesitate. He said it clearly. What more do they need to see? That wasn't frustration. That was disbelief. Fernando Alonso took it even further. He said something that stayed with everyone. That this doesn't feel like a sport anymore. That there are things happening drivers cannot control. And that changes everything. Because Formula One is built on control. On precision. On knowing exactly why something happens. Now, that clarity is gone. And when drivers don't understand why they're being overtaken, or why they're suddenly slower, the entire foundation starts to shake. But here's where the situation becomes even more intense. Because the crash didn't just validate the drivers. It exposed the system. In the most public way possible. Millions watching. Millions seeing exactly what the drivers had been describing. A car slowing down unpredictably. Another arriving too fast. A gap that shouldn't exist. And suddenly, this wasn't just a paddock conversation. It became global. Fans started asking questions. Media started digging deeper. And the narrative changed instantly. From concern to crisis. And the FIA had no choice. They had to respond. Not next season. Not eventually. Now. That's why the reaction was immediate. Statements released. Meetings scheduled. Adjustments discussed. Because ignoring it was no longer an option. But here's the problem. They still couldn't say it. They couldn't say, "We made a mistake." So instead, they used different words. Review. Evaluation. Adjustments. But the meaning was clear. Something is wrong. And it needs to change. Because if it doesn't, the next crash might not end the same way. And that's the reality nobody wants to face. But everyone is thinking about. And this is where everything escalates. Because now, drivers are no longer warning. They're demanding. Not individually. Together. And when the entire grid speaks with one voice, Formula One has no choice but to listen. But listening is not enough anymore. Because what they do next will decide everything. Because what they do next will decide everything. Not just this season. Not just these cars. The entire direction of Formula One. And this is where the real pressure begins. Because now, the FIA is trapped. If they act too slowly, they risk another incident. Another moment that proves the drivers were right. And that is something they cannot afford. But if they act too quickly, they risk breaking the competitive balance. Because every change creates winners and losers. Some teams will lose the advantage they spent years building. Others will suddenly gain one. And in Formula One, that's never accepted quietly. So now, every decision becomes political. Every adjustment, a negotiation. Every solution, a compromise. And that's the worst possible scenario. Because this isn't a problem that needs compromise. It needs clarity. But clarity means admitting something bigger. That the system itself might be flawed. And that's the one thing the FIA is trying to avoid. Because once you admit that, you don't just fix a rule. You question the entire project. Years of development. Years of planning. All leading to this moment. And now, under pressure, they have to decide. Protect the system. Or protect the sport. That's the real choice. And it's not just technical. It's philosophical. Because what's really being debated here is what Formula One should be. A showcase of advanced technology. Or the purest form of racing. Right now, it's caught between both. And that's why everything feels unstable. Because the sport is trying to be two things at once. And drivers feel that conflict every lap. They feel it when the car doesn't respond. When the power disappears. When the outcome depends on something they can't control. And that's why this reaction is so strong. Because this isn't just about safety anymore. It's about identity. What does it mean to be the fastest? What does it mean to win? What does it mean to be the best driver in the world? If those answers start to change, the sport changes with them. And that's exactly what's happening. Right now. In real time. But here's the part that makes this even more intense. Because while all of this is happening inside the sport, the outside world is watching. Fans, sponsors, manufacturers. And they're all asking the same question. Does this still feel like Formula One? Because if the answer is no, everything is at risk. Not just the rules. The entire business. The entire future. And that's why the next race is not just another race. It's a test. A moment where everything comes together. All the pressure. All the criticism. All the expectations. Because when those cars go back on track, There's nowhere to hide. No statements. No explanations. Just reality. Do the cars behave differently? Do the drivers push again? Does the racing feel real? Or does it still feel controlled? And within a few laps, everyone will know. Because Formula One doesn't hide its problems. It exposes them. At full speed. In front of the world. And if nothing changes? If the same issues appear again, then this situation doesn't calm down. It explodes. More voices. More pressure. More division. Until the FIA is forced into something much bigger. Not adjustments. Not small fixes. A complete rethink. And that's the moment they've been trying to avoid. Because once you reach that point, there's no going back. Only forward. Into a completely different version of Formula One. Or back. To what it was always meant to be. And that is the decision that now defines everything. And this is where the story reaches its final turning point. Because at some point, every sport is forced to answer one question. What matters most? And right now, Formula One is being pushed to that exact moment. Because everything we've seen, the frustration, the warnings, the crash, the anger, none of it exists in isolation. It all leads here, to a single decision. Does Formula One protect the system? Or does it protect the essence of racing? Because make no mistake, those two things are no longer perfectly aligned. The 2026 regulations were built for a reason. To modernize the sport. To attract manufacturers. To move toward a more sustainable future. And all of that still matters. But in doing so, they introduced something unexpected. A layer between the driver and the car. A system that decides. A system that intervenes. A system that changes performance in ways drivers cannot fully control. And that's the line that has now been crossed. Because Formula One has always been about removing limits. Not adding new ones. About pushing boundaries. Not managing restrictions. And that's why this moment feels so uncomfortable. Because the sport is no longer just evolving. It's transforming. And not everyone agrees with the direction. Drivers feel it every lap. Fans feel it every race. And now, the FIA has to decide how far they're willing to go. Because if they continue down this path, they might create a sport that is technically brilliant, but emotionally disconnected, precise, efficient, advanced, but missing something essential, something human, something instinctive, something that made Formula One what it is.